Okay, so can we get started? Yep. Awesome. You know what? I'm actually going to stop sharing screen so people can see my face. I think that, oh, they can see me? Oh, okay. Well, hi, everybody. Sorry about the delay here. It has been an adventure. I was speaking downstairs to a group of 150 people and then up here. So I apologize for being late. So today we are going to be talking about equity-based decision-making, but I want to start really with who am I, because I think the presenter is really important. I wish I could see you all too. That it's hard to not be able to see you all. It's weird to just be looking into a camera and to not know who's out there. So I'm just going to imagine some faces out there. But I think it's important for you to know who I am and how I show up in this space. And so I'm going to start by sharing a little bit of my professional background and a little bit of my personal story, so you know how I come into this space and how I come into this work. I want you to think about your own story too, because I believe this equity work requires really understanding our own personal story. That is really important to me. And so I share my story as an invitation to you to think about what's your story? How did you come into this work? How did you come into the session today? So professionally, I am in year 33 of working in school spaces. So I started as a classroom teacher. I moved from classroom teaching to assistant state superintendent. So I served on cabinet for 2 different state superintendents. I worked as an executive for 2 large school districts in the state. And then I am actually the first Black woman to run for any statewide office in the state of Washington. I ran to lead public schools in 2016, lost that race by 1 point, which I'm really glad about because I would have had to run schools during the pandemic. So I think I got rescued by 1 point. But I went from there to doing exclusively equity work. And I've been doing equity work for schools, higher education, government agencies, nonprofits, pretty much anyone that wants equity work. And then I spend about 30% of my time sharing my personal story. So that's me as a professional. Me personally and how I came into this work. Often people see the 6-foot-tall Black lady with the afro and make a lot of assumptions about me that are really wrong. I was born in 1971, and I was born out of the body of a white woman. My dad was obviously not white, because this is all me. It's not fake. This is all me. But I was born at a time when Black and white were not supposed to be together. And I was born in a place called Minneapolis, Minnesota, which you may have heard of. It has become infamous now. Not just George Floyd, but Philando Castile also was from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so imagine what has happened in Minneapolis in the last few years. Imagine that 50 years ago. It was not any better there for people who look like me. And so my mother would leave me in the hospital. I was sent to the Children's Home Society right away as a baby. I started life as an orphan. On my birth certificate today, for the name of my father, it says Negro. That's his name on my birth certificate. For the name of my mother, it's Norwegian woman. I know nothing more about them because the orphanage burned down in 1973. And of course, that was before computers and all of the records. Why am I sharing this? Because all of this will inform how I come into this equity work. And I just want to say from the beginning, I realize that equity work is not just about race. It's about lots of different things, but I'm going to paint a picture for you of how I come to do this work so that you can understand we are all shaped by our story. When I was 3 months old, a white couple showed up at the orphanage and they wanted to adopt babies. No one wanted. And the director at the time said, nobody wants Black babies. So my father tells the story of walking through the nursery, seeing my crib, and deciding to adopt me. The day they adopted me, they were disowned by both sides of their good Christian families. And so my dad had some pretty important decisions to make. He decided that first Christmas to bring me to meet his family. And so I did. I got to meet his family as a 6-month-old kid. And my grandfather took one look and said, "She's beautiful. I guess it's okay." I don't know what they were expecting. Most 6-month-old babies are cute. I mean, I've seen a couple that are not, but Most babies are cute. My grandfather would say she's beautiful. We accept her. What's really beautiful about my dad's side of the family, we are all 6 feet taller. We are all basketball players. We are all teachers. We've all written at least one book, and we all sing, except for they are all tow-headed blondes, Scandinavian guys. And then there's me. I'm the only girl on either side of the family. But my mom's side of the family did not accept me initially. And so we just didn't do anything with them. I ask people all the time, when did you first realize your skin color mattered? I can tell you the day it did for me. And people are often surprised that I didn't realize my parents were a different color than me earlier, but they were just mom and dad. It wasn't until I was 4 years old and I went to my best friend's birthday party. We were in preschool. Her name is Melanie Dunn. And Melanie put her arm next to mine. And I don't know why it took so long for her to make this revelation for herself, but she put her arm next to mine and she said, Erin, why are you always dirty? Why doesn't your mother ever give you a bath? And when I share that story with high school kids or middle school kids, they always get really upset. And I tell students, in Stillwater, Minnesota, where I lived, I was the only brown person of any kind in our entire region. She nor anyone else had ever seen anybody with my skin color. So was she racist? No, she was really ignorant. But here's the worst part of that story. The worst part of that story is actually not her. It's me. I ran to her bathroom and I decided maybe I am dirty. Maybe my mom's been using the wrong soap. And so I ran to her bathroom and I'm trying to wash the brown off my skin. Of course, it doesn't go anywhere. And I would run home. I did not stay for the rest of the party. I ran home to my house and my dad met me at the door. And he's, honey, what's wrong? And I said, Daddy, you need to buy me different soap so I can be white like everybody else. And that was the beginning of a journey for our family. My dad knew that day, something's got to change. This is not okay. And so my dad decided to take his teaching degree and apply for jobs overseas. His first job offer was actually the American School of Tehran in Iran. And he actually got offered the job. And when he was on the phone doing the interview with the superintendent at the time, the soup had asked him if he had any questions. And my dad had one question. My dad from northern Minnesota, who had never thought about race until me. My dad's one question for the superintendent was, so I have a Black child. How do you think your community is going to deal with that? Now, if you know anything about Tehran, Iran in the 70s, why were Americans there? Well, because of oil. And who were the Americans that would have been in Tehran, Iran? Southerners. My dad had made the connection. Southern white folks, maybe this is not a great idea. And so he asked the question of the superintendent, and the superintendent's response was, well, I wouldn't have a problem, but I think my community might. And my father said that day, I could never work for you. And do you know that school was taken over by Iranian military in 1978 and hostages were taken. And I think all the time, what if my father had not been so courageous to ask that question? We would have been in the school the day that it was taken over and hostages were taken. But because of my dad's courage, we ended up in a different school. My dad took a job teaching at the American School of The Hague in the Netherlands. And I would end up going to school with United Nations World Court lawyers, children, ambassadors' children from all over the world, Microsoft Europe, Shell Europe, Conoco Europe. My school today for elementary school costs $39,000 a year. But I went for free because my dad was a teacher there. That was one of the benefits of being at that school, is I went for free. So imagine being once orphaned, now suddenly going to school with children from all over the world who were very powerful. That would change the trajectory of my life. And I want to share a couple stories from that time because it informs how I come into this work. Especially right now, this story matters in ways that I couldn't have imagined even a year ago. When I was in the 4th grade, my best friend was the Israeli ambassador's daughter. Now, many Americans think the conflict right now is new, that this is surprise. Wow, this is horrible. This conflict has been ongoing since 1941. But in 1980, when I was in 4th grade, I remember the day a bomb hit Jerusalem. And I can't remember if it was a suicide bomber, but I remember the day that a bomb hit Jerusalem, and that's where my best friend's family was living. And of course, we didn't have internet, we didn't have telephones. And so she came to school the next day crying. And she was really worried about her aunties and uncles and grandparents. And I remember as a little Black adopted girl, My heart broke for her. And my first reaction was, man, I need to learn about her country. I don't know anything about Israel. I don't know what it is to be Jewish. And so I went to our school library and I asked the librarian, what are all the books that you have on Israel and Judaism? I need to learn to support my friends. I don't know why, but my instinct told me if I'm going to help her, I need to know more about her country. Well, I also began to learn Hebrew as a 9-year-old kid. She began to teach me Hebrew. About 3 months later in December, my parents dragged me to a PTA meeting. This is what happens when you're a teacher's kid. And I had planned to just sit at the back of the room and watch these adults do their thing. But when I get to the library, I noticed that at the main table in the middle is my friend Yael's father, the Israeli ambassador. And I know this is not a regular PTA meeting. And I listen as the men go around the table to introduce themselves. And guess who is 2 people away from him? The Palestinian Liberation Organization ambassador, because it turns out his son is in the 2nd grade, 2 doors down from us. So you have these 2 men whose countries are at war with each other, sitting in the same room to talk about the education of their children. And here I am, a 9-year-old kid. I have a revelation that day, sitting at the back of a library. I think I need to learn Arabic. If these men can talk about the education of their children, I bet I could get them to talk about peace in their countries. I was 9 years old. So I began to learn Arabic the next day. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm learning Hebrew. Tuesday, Thursday, I'm learning Arabic. And then in March of 1981, our school gets a call from the embassy of Egypt, the country of Egypt. At the time in 1981, they were in the middle of a civil war. And Anwar Sadat's wife, the president's wife, had a dream one night. If we could just convince small children to stop war, to commit to peace, maybe we can end wars forever. And she had a dream that she was going to bring her friend John Denver and he would sing at schools and then she would tell her story and kids would sign a pledge for peace. What better place to start than the United Nations school? And so she called her office called my principal and said, can we come test out our idea? So here I am, a 9-year-old kid learning Arabic and Hebrew, suddenly getting a visit from a president's wife from the continent of Africa. Light-skinned Black woman, looks like me, first Black woman I had ever met in my life. And she comes and speaks at my school. And at the end of her speech, after listening to John Denver sing, which I totally did not appreciate as a 9-year-old kid, the 4th grade teachers were asked, who are the 3 kids most likely to change the world? John Denver and Mrs. Sadat would like to take them for lunch. And guess who got chosen at 9 years old to have lunch with Mrs. Sadat and John Denver? My mom literally today, I don't even know why, today found a picture of me at lunch with John Denver and Mrs. Sadat in 1981. I got to have lunch with her. And she would ask us not what we'd like to do for fun. Her very first question, how are you going to change the world? My hand was at my little 4th grade hand. And I said, I am going to broker peace between Israel and Palestine. I'm learning to speak Arabic and Hebrew. And someday I want to get those 2 countries to come together as one. That means a whole lot today and differently than what I would have even a year ago. But I made a commitment to her that day that I wanted to be part of peace. And she would go away, she'd go back to Egypt, and John Denver would go back to the United States. And I decided that day I want to change the world. I want to be a healer and a bridge builder. And so I began to live that way as a kid. And I knew if I really wanted to change the world, I had to come back to America, go to college here, go to one of the big Ivy League colleges. And so I applied to Princeton. And I remember the day in March of 1989 when they got the letter at the counseling center and they announced over the loudspeaker before I even got to see the letter, Erin has been accepted at Princeton, and everybody's cheering all over my school. And I'm so excited. I've worked so hard to get to Princeton. And I get home that night and my dad is sitting down at the dining room table and he's been crying. My dad is not a crier. And I thought maybe someone had died. And my Princeton paperwork is all across the table. And my dad sits me down and he says, honey, you did everything we asked you to do and more, but we have to say no to Princeton. What did Princeton assume about me when they looked at my name and the name of my high school? And I'll just say they never looked at my financial aid paperwork to see that I was a teacher's kid. They assumed I was a white kid with rich parents. And even though I graduated number 2 in my class, I spoke 4 languages fluently. I'd been a triple varsity athlete and captain for 3 years, 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. I was the captain of 3 sports, MVP of 3 sports, soccer, basketball, softball. I ran the largest Model United Nations in the world. Princeton offered me a $1,000 scholarship. And my dad that day had to tell me, you're not going to Princeton. And I don't know who was more upset that day, my dad or me. But I would end up coming back to America to attend the sister school to Princeton. It's called Bryn Mawr. And it's a school right outside of Philadelphia. What I knew about Philadelphia is that's where Bill Cosby was from. I know he's a hot mess now, but we did not know that in 1989. And I knew that's where Will Smith was from because we'd just gotten the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It was his first season. And so I thought, yeah, Black girl in Philly, that sounds great. And I get to Philadelphia a week early for college to play soccer. And I'm driving out from the airport to campus, and campus is not in Philadelphia. It's in one of the wealthiest suburbs in America, 7th wealthiest suburb in America, and not Issaquah, Bellevue wealthy. It's old money wealthy. Why does that matter? Because there are certain things that happen in old wealthy communities that are not like here in Washington. One of the first signs in town, Bryn Mawr town, second sign, Bryn Mawr golf course, no coloreds or Jews allowed here. By the way, color does not mean any people of color. It means Black people. So just imagine, no Blacks or Jews allowed here. This is 1989. That sign did not come down until 2012. I want you to imagine being a colored girl in America for the first time. And that's the sign not even a mile from your college campus. I knew, because I'd studied American history, I knew I was in trouble, and I knew I'd worked so hard to get to America, I was not about to go back. So I didn't tell my parents about the sign. But my second week on my college campus, a woman walked up to me, a white woman, and she pointed at me in the face. She'd never met me before. I'd never met her. And she said, "You are only here because we have to have 10 of you." I remember saying to her, 10 of who? I don't even understand what you mean. 10 of what? And she said, affirmative action. You're only here because we have to have 10 of you to get money from the government. That was the day I learned about affirmative action. And I made the decision that day to walk across the street to talk to the admissions officer. And that poor woman had to walk me through what affirmative action was and to confirm for me that, yes, I was one of the 10 Black women on campus. And that's how I'd gotten there. And here's what I'll tell you. My 18-year-old self, for the very first time in my life, doubted myself. I thought maybe I didn't earn my spot here. Now at 52, I'll tell you, I more than earned my spot at Bryn Mawr. But at 18 years old in America by myself, I began to doubt myself. And that was the moment a chasm opened of doubt and self-hatred. The only thing that kept me going was I played college soccer and then college basketball. I started on my team as a freshman. I averaged 23 points a game. I literally played every single minute of every game because we had 3 players that had knee injuries that year. We won every game for the first time in the history of my college. And do you know, my coach at the end of season never once checked on me. He knew I had nowhere to go for spring break. He knew I had nowhere to go on the weekends. Not once did he check on me. Not once did any of the upperclassmen check on me. And I stopped going to class. And I stopped believing I could change the world. I stopped believing that I mattered at all. And one day in April, right at the end of my freshman year, I'm laying in bed, just depressed. I didn't even know what to call that because we didn't talk about depression back then. But I felt like I just didn't belong and I wanted to be invisible. I wanted to just disappear from the earth. And something in me said, get out of bed and just get out of here. And I started walking. I didn't even know where I was going. And I ended up in a tiny little community called Ardmore. Ardmore is where the Black families, the help, lived. It's where the Black families who worked as nannies and drivers and chefs lived. And that day, in the middle of that community, a basketball game was getting ready to start. There was a really tall man, and he called out to me. He said, "You are obviously a ball player. Get out here. We need one more to play 5-on-5." And I had never played street ball before, but I knew you did not say no to this man. So I was like, okay, I'm coming. And I would play all day with them. And this very tall man at the end of the day would leave with his 2 sons and his Mercedes Benz. And I turned to these high school boys and I said, "Who is that Jay guy we just played with?" And they looked at me like I had 3 heads and they said, "Dr. J? How do you not know who Dr. J is?" And some of you on camera may not know who Dr. J is. Google him later. One of the greatest NBA stars to ever play the game. I had just played with him all day. And I had no idea who this man was. And I said, okay, doctor, I don't know who that is, but he's obviously really good. And those boys looked at me like I was crazy. And they said, where are you from? I said, I'm from the Netherlands. And they said, the what? And I said, yeah, it's in Europe, over across the ocean. And they said, where's Europe? These boys were probably 15, 16 years old. And I looked at them and said, how do you not know where Europe is? Where do you go to school? And all three boys said, we stopped going to school after the 8th grade. And I said, the girl who was depressed, who just wanted to not be, I said to these boys that day, what is your dream for the future if you're not going to get a high school diploma? And all three boys said, we don't expect to live to be 21. And I knew in that moment exactly why I had been created. Black girl out of a white woman's body, athlete and academic, born in America, but raised in a country that really taught me to be my best self. And I ran all the way back to my college. And you had to call an operator to call Europe back then. And so I called the operator, called Europe, woke my parents up in the middle of the night, and I am crying. And I finally realized for the first time how much my parents had given me. And I realized how much they had sacrificed. And I realized that they, as teachers, had been changing the world my whole life. I just had never seen it that way. And I said to my parents, I'm so grateful for you. And I know how I want to change the world now. I want to be just like you, but I want to teach kids who look like me. So I'm not coming home. And I never did go home. I've been in the United States for the last 34 years. I never did go home. I taught in North Philadelphia. And if you have not ever been to North Philly, there's a neighborhood in North Philly where the MOVE group used to be. And MOVE was an activist group of Black activists. And in 1985, the government dropped a bomb on that neighborhood, destroying 60 homes in the neighborhood, and never rebuilt it. And the children that I taught lived in those homes without running water or electricity and came to school every day. And that's where I started my teaching career. And I knew as a 19-year-old kid, and then a 20-year-old kid, and then a 21-year-old, the greatest justice issue in this country was education. The greatest issues of equity came around what color you were, what zip code you lived in. How did I begin this work? I began this work in schools, making sure that I did whatever I could to make sure students had people who really believed in them, who were advocating for them to get what they needed. Flash forward, I met my husband while we were in college. He played football at Oregon State University. He's the bigger, younger brother of Jesse Jones, Cairo News. They both grew up here in Tacoma, Washington, and we would get married at Notre Dame University, where he did his graduate work. When we were in our 3rd year of marriage and we were getting ready to have our 2nd kid, we tried to buy a home outside of Notre Dame campus. And over the phone, what did they assume about me when I asked to make an appointment? Assumed I was going to be a white woman. And when my large Black husband and I showed up, this woman saw me and she took one step back and she said, oh, we don't sell to your kind here. And she said, and no one will sell to your kind out here. And I turned to my husband that day, this is 1995, and I said to him, where could we live where my white parents and us could live on the same block? And without batting an eyelash, my husband said, Tacoma, Washington is the only place I know. And so we moved here 26 and a half years ago. Don't regret it at all. We love this community. Is it perfect? No. But this is where we raised our children. We came here with 2 little boys, 1 and 3 years old. And then just a few months in, I was playing in a men's basketball league. And one day, my husband's little sister knocked on the door. She had a 2-year-old daughter. So I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. And she had a 2-year-old in her arms. My sister-in-law was a Hilltop Crip. She was one of the founding members of the largest Black gang in the state of Washington. And she was not making good choices. And she said, Erin, would you take my daughter just for a couple months? I just need to get clean. I said, sure. And I took our daughter. Well, my boys knew how to do basketball because mommy had been playing basketball their whole lives, but my niece did not know how to do basketball. And I'll never forget my first men's game. I'm going to step on the court. And her mom used to tell her, I'm going to the bathroom, and she would lock her in the house and leave her there for days while she went to get high. When I went onto the court that first game, she thought I was leaving her and she screamed bloody murder. And I knew I couldn't afford to play basketball. I needed to just take care of her. So I quit playing basketball for a year. At the end of that year, I get a phone call. Erin Jones, yes, this is the Seattle Storm. Why? We'd like to offer you a tryout. Why? It was the first year the Seattle Storm was in Seattle and they were doing an open tryout. And I got invited to try out. Now, what I should have said to the lady on the phone is I'm 28, I have 3 little kids, and I have not touched a basketball for a year. That's not what I said. I said, when are tryouts? And the lady said 3 months. And I said, I will see you there. And I agreed to try out for a team. I don't know why, but my mother-in-law called me 24 hours later. She said, honey, I had the weirdest dream last night. I know you're a stay-at-home mom, but I had a dream that I'm supposed to come live with you for a little while. And I got to try out not only for the Seattle Storm, but on a Friday, I tried out for the Seattle Storm. On a Saturday, I tried out for the Portland Fire. At lunch on Saturday, I thought my body was just going to die right there. I have never been so tired and sore in my entire life, and I just wanted to quit. And then something told me, Erin, you can do anything for 3 more hours. Just finish out. So I finished out the day, and I'm laid on the court after the last buzzer rings. And suddenly there's a camera over my face and a voice. Erin Jones. Yes, this is NBA Live. Why? You were the oldest woman with the most children to try out for the WNBA this year. So I did an interview with the NBA Live on my back. I don't think they ever played it because I was a hot mess. But when it was over, this tiny little woman was waiting for me. She said, Erin, I've been watching you all day today. I said, I'm sorry, it was not pretty. She said, no, I was really impressed. She said, I watched you at lunch think about quitting. And then I watched you find something inside yourself to keep going. And you were a leader. It's really obvious. She said, I played on the very first women's Olympic team for the United States. And I'm taking a group of women to play against the Mexican Olympic team next summer. Would you be our player captain? I was like, yes. I probably should have waited and asked my husband because we still had 3 little kids at home. But I got to play against the Mexican Olympic team that following summer at 30 years old. On my birthday, we played against the Mexican Olympic team for the first time. And at halftime, I got to share the story you just heard in Spanish because I speak Spanish too, in front of 5,000 people. And I'll never forget when I was done speaking, everybody stood up and sang happy birthday. And when the game was over that day, about 100 little kids lined up and they wanted me to sign their t-shirts and their shorts and their socks. They were so impressed with how much I had done in my life. And I knew that day, as much as I love basketball, I love children and I want to be a voice for children. So when I came back to the States, I knew it was time to go back to teaching. Except I got a call from my cousin, my dad's side. He said, Erin, I'm coaching a basketball camp right before the school year starts. I've been watching your journey. You need to come coach with me just for a week. Just come out to northern Minnesota. What I knew is my cousin on my dad's side lived in the same small town as my mom's mom. And if you remember from the beginning of my story, Dad's family accepted me, mom's family did not. And I said, Bill, I will only come if you arrange for me to meet my mom's mom. And he said, are you sure? I know her. I said, I'm positive. And so I would fly to Minnesota and coach a day of camp, and he would drop me at her apartment. My little grandma, about 4'11", met me at the door, and she had a shoebox in her hands. And she began to take things out of the shoebox. She was 86 years old. Do you know my mom, all those years, had been sending her my school pictures and newspaper clippings and certificates? All of that was in the shoebox. And my 86-year-old grandma said to me that day, Erin, do you know, out of all of our grandchildren, you were the favorite. We're more proud of you than any of the others. We just didn't know how to tell you because you're, and she used the N word with the hard R. And I felt like I'd been slapped in the face. And I said, Grandma, you can't say that word. And she said, what do I call you? And I realized in that moment, my grandma was not racist all this time. She just didn't know how to talk to us. And I said, Grandma, how about you call me Erin? And then she would say these words that I'll never forget. Can you ever forgive us? Your grandfather went to his grave and he never got to tell you how much he loved you. And I held all 4'11" of her in my belly button and we cried. And she died 3 months later. And I realized the day that she died, I wanted to devote the rest of my life to helping America have the conversations that we've avoided for far too long. And so one of the ways that I want to start our conversation today is with this reality that for those of you that are over 45, and I can't see who's on the screen, but I assume that some of you are over 45, we were all taught, don't talk about race, don't talk about gender, don't talk about sexuality, don't talk about money, don't talk about politics and mixed company. And so guess what? We suck at it. We suck at it. We're not good at it. And so our nature as humans is to avoid anything that we suck at. And so we've not ever gotten good at talking about those things. And equity requires that we have those conversations. And I made a promise to myself almost 30 years ago, I will be part of our healing by helping people get good at doing hard things. So today, my invitation for you online, in whatever role you play in state government, I'm going to challenge you to think about doing the hard thing. And you're all in different places on the journey. You all have different stories. Know that your story has brought you here today. There's a reason you're here today. And I really want to invite you to think about your own story. But one of the ways I do this work really differently from a lot of people is and I think it's because I'm a classroom teacher by trade, I think we often in state government give people lots of charts and documents and lots of language, all the terminology, we get all the right terminology, but we don't give you the emotional and mental containers to hold that in. And so we're going to start today with some things that are maybe unique for government, but I think are necessary if we're really going to have the conversations we need to have. And so I just wrote a book called Bridges to Heal Us. And these are 3 what I call postures or behavior strategies that I practice every day. Y'all, I get called into white rural America when there's been some sort of racial conflict. I am in some really tough spaces. I don't get to talk in places like Tacoma very often. I was in Coeur d'Alene 2 weeks ago. I was in Oregon for a week, the week before that. I am in really tough spaces. These are things that I practice for myself every day that I want to invite you to practice. And then by the end of today, we'll get to some terminology and tools. And that will all be in the PowerPoint. I'm also going to send anyone who's interested. I have other documents that can help you on your journey as well. But the first posture and the most important is gratitude. I start every single conversation with gratitude. And here's why. It's not this mushy thing. Here's what happens when you practice gratitude. One of my best friends has a PhD in education, and her thesis was on gratitude, the power of gratitude. Do you know that when you are grateful, when you speak out something that you're grateful for, when you write down something you're grateful for, your body gets washed with something called dopamine, and that makes your body feel good. Dopamine, it washes you. It's kind of like a drug. It makes your body feel good. So why do we practice gratitude? Because y'all, government work is hard. It's really hard. And you need to feel good as you're moving through it. So I want to encourage you to practice gratitude, number 1, because you'll just feel better. Here's the most important thing about gratitude that my friend learned though. Do you know when you make gratitude a habit, and that means doing it probably 90 days in a row, builds a habit, the dendrites in your brain will literally reform themselves to create what she called a positive neural network. So literally your brain will reform itself to create this thing called a positive neural network. What's important about that? What's important about a positive neural network is that when there are fires burning all around you, which I would argue in the US and internationally right now, there are fires burning everywhere. That positive neural network will help you see hope instead of devastation. It will help you be hopeful when it feels like the whole world is on fire. I would argue we need that right now. So why practice gratitude every day? Because the work we do is really hard. Even on the best of days, it's really hard. So here's what I want to invite you to do in the chat. I know this is a webinar, but in the chat, if you can, I want to invite you to share something that you're grateful for today. And this is a practice I do with all government agencies, with students when I meet with them. If we're on Zoom, we type the gratitude in the chat. If we're in a meeting, I'll have people turn and talk to their partner, share something you're grateful for. I want you to just take the next 30 seconds, type something in the chat that you are grateful for today. Oh, that's great. Lots of family. That's awesome. Warm blankets. I love that. Oh, cat. I love that. Yes. Awesome. Keep sharing. Mm. Oh, that's awesome. Healing. Yes. Fresh air, water, kind smiles, and hugs. Oh, thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for sharing. So I want to encourage you to make this part of your team's practice. So if you're leading a team, if you're on a team, I do work for Puget Sound Energy, and they always have a safety moment as part of their teams. They also now have a gratitude moment. They have taken this really seriously. So I want to encourage you, whatever team you sit on, I want to encourage you as part of your team meetings, make gratitude part of your practice. Even if your team meeting is just once a week, just make it a priority to be grateful. When you don't have a team meeting, I want to encourage you to keep a gratitude journal if you'd like to write. And here's the other thing. Maybe you'd like to doodle your gratitude. When I work with students, I tell them,
I'm in Daddy's room.
oh, that was weird.
I'm in
Anyway,
Daddy's room.
the daddy's room, we can hear you. Whoever you are, you're not muted. Just so you know. I love.
By Daddy.
Oh. Anyway, if you're a parent, which many of you probably are, I want to encourage you, practice gratitude with your children. Gratitude is really, it's a really powerful strategy to help practicing with your children. Uh-oh, this is really strange. You got it. Okay. I was gonna say, I think we fixed it though. We fixed it. Or you have a fabulous staff over here that is has taken care of that. Anyway, practice gratitude with your children. Practice gratitude with your partner, with your spouse. Make gratitude a habit. Y'all, there are fires burning all over the place. And if you can find ways to be hopeful right now, it will help you make decisions and not feel like I just want to curl up in a ball and stop. And so I really want to encourage you. I practice gratitude every single day. I've been doing it since March 12th. How many of you remember March 12th of 2020, the day that schools were shut down? I made a choice that day to begin practicing gratitude, and it has really shaped how I've moved through the rest of my life. So gratitude is posture number one. And thank you for sharing your gratitude. Posture number two is this thing that I call community agreements. I want to invite us. Many of you probably have meeting norms, and meeting norms were kind of the rage for a long time. I don't talk about meeting norms because norm is short for normal. Whose normal are we centering? And what I find because of where I grew up is we are often centering what's normal for my white parents, not what's normal for my Black husband. And so I want to invite us to a different way of thinking about what are the ways that we all need to be brave. Let's agree on what are the things that we can agree to as a community. And I want to center us on being brave. And here's why I don't talk about safe spaces. I don't think it's possible to create a space that is safe for everyone at every minute. And here's why. As a classroom teacher, I know this. At any point in time, if you are autistic, if you have ADD, ADHD, OCD, if you don't speak English as your first language, if you are Muslim in a room that has lots of Christian people, if you are queer in a room where people are talking about sexuality, at any point in time, you may not feel safe. I want to create a space that is safe enough for us to be brave. So I want us to focus on brave because I think brave is the place where change is made. I don't think change is made in safe. I think change is made in brave, but I want this to be a space that is safe enough for you to be brave. Now, obviously, this is a webinar, so you're not going to have the same opportunity to talk as other groups would, but I want you to think about the context of your workspace. How could you make that space safe enough to be brave? I'm going to give you some options, and I have on the screen in front of you, you have some of the options that I provide people. If I were doing a 3-hour workshop on community agreements, what I would have you do actually is sit at tables or sit in small groups on Zoom and talk with each other about which ones can you agree with, what would you add? But I would ask you this question: what are the circumstances you need in this space to be your bravest self? And these are just my offerings. Number one, no fixing. We're not going to get to equity in an hour and a half session. That's just not going to happen. It's not possible. But I think sometimes we want that. We want to check the box and say, I did the equity session, I'm good. That's not how this works. So you're not going to fix stuff in a 1 hour setting. Second thing, I want to invite you, this conversation is going to require that you take risks, that you ask that question that maybe you've been afraid to ask, that you say the thing that you're not sure it's going to be received the right way, but I'm really thinking this thing. I want you to embrace discomfort. Okay. Got it. Okay. I want you to embrace discomfort. These conversations are really uncomfortable. And I want to give you an example. It's not a life skill. I don't ask people to do what I'm not willing to do. I played basketball for 40 years. So I just stopped playing 7 years ago at 45. And I started walking, and I love walking. I've always loved walking. But I went through menopause during the pandemic and gained 30 pounds and just felt really icky. And my husband said, hey, I think you need to go lift weights and join Orange Theory with me. So we both joined Orange Theory. And Orange Theory, if you don't know, you lift and you row and you run. And I have never understood people who liked running into nowhere. Like people that like to run on a treadmill, that made no sense to me at all. People who like to run into the woods by themselves, I didn't understand why people would want to do that. But I realized that Orange Theory, I was pretty fast during that running time. So they would often have us do sprints, and I'm like, oh, I'm the fast. Yeah, I know you're not supposed to compare yourself, but I'm an athlete. I'm looking at people thinking, man, even at 51 at the time, I was faster than almost everybody. And I started to really like the running part. Then I said, I'm going to take this outside. And I began to run a little bit. And then one of my friends said, you should run a half marathon with me. I said, okay, let's do this. Y'all, the first mile always sucked. Every time I'd go out to train, that first mile, I was so uncomfortable. I thought I was going to die. And I would ask myself, why the heck are you out here, Erin? And then I realized I'm asking people to be uncomfortable in conversations about race all the time. What a great way for me to practice being uncomfortable. And so I began to run 6 days a week. I always take a rest day, but I began to run 6 days a week. And I would try to run at least 2 miles a day. And then I got up to 3 miles a day. And then every Saturday I'd run 5 miles. And then I got up to 8 miles on Saturday. And I ran this half marathon, and I ran it in under 2 hours, which I was kind of blown away. And I thought, I need to just keep running. Do you know, I just ran a 5K 3 weeks ago in 23 minutes, which if you Google like good race times, incredibly fast for a 52-year-old woman. Why am I sharing that? It's not about bragging. Here's what is true for me today. That first mile no longer sucks for me. In fact, the first 3 miles don't suck anymore. By mile 5, yeah, it feels really uncomfortable, which is why I run more now. For some of you, this first mile of talking about equity is going to suck. And I need you to stay with me. I need you to stay with me because eventually it will not suck as much. But I need you to embrace the suck, if that makes sense. So discomfort is a part of this, being brave. Okay. Here's the other really critical thing, especially in Washington State. I don't believe shame, blame, and guilt are useful. I see lots of people, especially in the Pacific Northwest, shaming, blaming, and guilting people when they don't use the right language. I want to invite us to not do that. As a classroom teacher, here's one of the things I learned teaching middle school. 12 and 13-year-olds, bodies and their brains are not connected yet, and they do dumb, even the best 12-year-old does dumb stuff all the time because they just don't, everything is all haywire. And if I were to say to little John when he did something dumb, you are so dumb, John, do you think he's going to learn from me anymore? No, I'll tell you after 15 years of teaching, he's not learning from me anymore. So I never called a child stupid in my classroom, not ever, even when I was angry, never, because I knew I was going to lose that child. Y'all, we are just big 12-year-olds. Not one of you wants to be called racist or sexist or transphobic or homophobic. And we do that all the time to each other. I see people do it on Twitter. I can't call it X. It just feels weird. On Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, I see people, they'll take a screenshot of, look at that dumb thing that person said. and then post it everywhere. Y'all, if we want to get healthy, we have to stop doing that. But it also means when you make a mistake, no shame, blame, or guilt for yourself either. So when you make a mistake, fess up, say, I messed up there. Man, I said the wrong thing there. That was really harmful. I am sorry. Not if you were offended by what I said. That's not an apology. I am sorry. What I said there was really harmful. And then pivot back, because I see just as harmful as making other people feel ashamed is watching someone beat themselves up for a whole week over something they said. Guess what? When you beat yourself up for a whole week, it becomes about you and not about we. It's actually really selfish. So I want, when you mess up, what you're going to do, fess up, pivot back to learning. Last thing about being brave, and this is the hardest one, I think. I'm going to encourage you to get curious about people whose stories and belief systems and voting patterns are really different from you. And again, I'm going to give you an example because I don't believe in asking you to do what I'm not willing to do. If you have lived in the Pacific Northwest for any length of time, you have heard of a place called Hayden Lake, Idaho. Hayden Lake, Idaho is ground zero for the Aryan Nation. In 1985, one of the largest Aryan Nation white supremacist colonies was raided by the FBI and taken over. So there's a long history. 1985 is really not that long ago, but there's a long history in that region of anti-Black, anti-Jewish sentiment. 2 weeks ago, I was invited to speak at a conference in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which I lived in Spokane. I've been to Coeur d'Alene a million times. I don't ever drive myself from the airport to Coeur d'Alene because there's just too much stuff happening out there right now. I always have someone come pick me up. So this woman came and picked me up and brought me out to Coeur d'Alene, but we were an hour early. And she said, Erin, I'd love to drop you at the resort so you can get yourself washed up and whatever. I'm going to go change clothes and I'll come back and get you. And I said, sure. And I assumed I was staying at the Coeur d'Alene resort because that's what was in my phone. So I'm not thinking I'm on my phone. And we drive past the Hayden Lake town sign. And I looked at her and I said, Janice, where are we going? She said, oh, you're staying at the resort. I said, I know, but the resort is in Coeur d'Alene. She said, no, I live at the Hayden Lake Resort. We got you a condo there. And I said, Janice, did you not see who I am? Really? You're going to take me to stay in Hayden Lake, Idaho? And her face got ashy and she could see tears in her eyes. And she said, Erin, I did not even think about you and how this might make you feel. You know what? I'll put you up in a hotel in Coeur d'Alene. I'm so sorry. And I paused and I took a deep breath and I said, nope, you know what, Janice? I'm asking your community to get curious about me. How dare I not get curious about you? I'm going to stay at the resort. So I did. I stayed at the resort. And that night I opened my speech by saying, I just need you all to know that I'm staying in Hayden Lake. And I want you to understand what that feels like for me. And I need you to understand that I'm not asking you to do something I'm not willing to do. And do you know that audience of about 500 all white people, many of them very conservative, received me and heard my message in a way that they may not have had I not chosen to be courageous and get curious. So again, I'm not asking you to do stuff that I'm not willing to do. Now, I did not go running in Hayden Lake, Idaho the next morning, which I usually would run in the morning. I was not trying, I'm wise. I'm not dumb. Okay. I'm going to be brave, but I also am going to be wise. I did not run in Hayden Lake, Idaho. I waited till I got home that night. But I want to invite you to being brave. I think these conversations, even your professional conversations, have got to be brave if we're going to do the right work for everyone in Washington state. So posture number 1 was gratitude. Posture number 2 is what I call brave spaces, but set up some community agreements in your office. I want to encourage you in your next meeting, talk about what are the community agreements we need to agree to do the best work we possibly can do. Last posture is what is called grounding in. And I did not come up with this term. There are so many different grounding and strategies, but for this one, we're going to do a grounding and strategy that I use with 84-year-olds down to 4-year-olds. Wherever you're sitting, and I know I can't see you, but I can see you because I'm a teacher. So I'm imagining you out there in Zoom land. So I want you to follow directions. So if you're doing stuff, cooking stuff, playing with your children, have your kids do this with you. I want you to sit in a chair. If you're standing up, you can stand up too, as straight as possible. I want your chest cavity to be as open as possible. So sit up as straight as you're able to. Get your feet planted on the floor. I love to imagine that we are connected through the floor all across the state of Washington. So I imagine that in my head. Put your hand on your chest. I want you to give yourself a point of contact. I'm going to ask you for 20 seconds to just listen to the air as it goes in and out of your body. Just listen to the air. I like to close my eyes just because I get distracted. If you don't like to close your eyes or don't feel comfortable doing that, if you will look down at a 45-degree angle, it releases your limbic nerve to be able to get you calm. So if you don't want to close your eyes, just look down at a 45-degree angle. Follow me. We're just going to take 20 seconds worth of deep breaths. If you have kids, have them do it with you today. Take a deep breath in. Blow it out. Take a deep breath in. Blow it out. One last deep breath in. Blow it out. Open your eyes, stretch a little bit. I want to encourage you when you feel tired to just pause and ground in, even if you only have 10 seconds. How many of you today have gone from one Zoom meeting to the next, and you haven't even gotten it from your computer? So what happens is you bring meeting 1 into meeting 2 into meeting 3, and you never pause to get fully present. I think we make better decisions when we are fully present, and this is a really great strategy. Imagine too, if every world leader just paused before they made decisions. Imagine if they're in a press conference and somebody yells something out from the audience or asks them a question that's really tough. If instead of the word vomit that we usually get, bleh, they just paused, got themselves grounded, 5 seconds, and then responded, how much more thoughtfully we can engage one another. So I'm going to encourage you that pause is really powerful. If you are in a staff meeting and someone says something really offensive, and you can feel yourself getting emotional and heated and upset and frustrated, instead of responding in the moment, just take a moment to pause and then respond in a way that's thoughtful. And here's the last thing that I'm going to encourage you. I'm going to do a really teachery thing. And again, I can't see you, but I can see you because I'm a teacher. I want you to put your hands in front of you. I want to give you a little strategy. And I use this again with children and with adults. There's nothing like watching a bunch of superintendents in suits do this. Let's call each other in and up into the best version of ourselves, not out and down into shame. I want you to do that again. Let's call each other in and up into the best version of ourselves, not out and down into shame. If you're in a meeting and you get heated and emotional and you know your nature is, I want to make that person feel small. I'm going to be right. Stop. Just stop. Step away from the table. Go walk around a little bit until you can call that person into the better version of themselves. So I am always playing this in my head. Okay, am I calling this person in to a better version of themselves, or am I trying to make them small? I think we give away our energy in ways that are not helpful. And so if you're always trying to be the right one and you're trying to make people look stupid, trying to make them small, just stop. Now, if you're in a meeting and someone says something offensive and you don't have anything helpful to say in that moment, here's a strategy that I use with executives. I will say to the person, if I know I'm heated and I don't have anything helpful to say, I will say, hey, you know what? Can we talk about that later? And that lets everybody around the table know, I heard that, it was inappropriate, but it allows me to wait until I'm able to say something helpful before I respond. So just a strategy that I use. So here we go. Number 1, posture was gratitude. Number 2, brave space. Number 3 was just pause. Just pause. Just stop and breathe when you can feel yourself getting emotional. When you know you're headed into that meeting that is going to be contentious, just pause first. Take time to breathe. Okay. So let's see. Okay, here's what I want to do. Because we are on Zoom and it's a little bit different. I'm trying to think of creative ways to do this. Okay, here's what I'm going to have you do on Zoom in the chat. I'm going to assign you a term and I don't want you to Google it. No Googling, no Googling. I will know if you have Googled. I just want your idea of a definition for this term, okay? If your last name begins with the letters A to E, I want you to give me, what is your definition for diversity? In the context of the work that you do, how would you define diversity? If your last name begins with the letters A to E. If your last name begins with the letters F to J, F to J, no, we'll go F to K. F to K last name. How would you define the term culturally responsive practice? And the terms are on the screen. And I know that one is really hard. So if you have to make something up, make something up. Look at those, each of those words separately and just give me whatever you think. But don't go Googling. I will know if you have Googled. So A to E, and then F to K are doing culturally responsive practice. Then L to O, what do you think equity means? And not home equity. And equity and equality are not the same thing. So if you are tempted to say equity is equality, I'm going to tell you right now, that's not what it is. So make up something else if that's what you thought it was. And then the last group, let's see, last group, the rest of the letters, what do you think it means to belong? What do you think it means to belong? What does it mean to belong? Let's see what we got in here. I would love this. So we have diversity as an understanding of all the types of people who are members of a population and not just serving the one you're accustomed to. Yes. Culturally responsive practice, centering the experience of those you're serving. Awesome. Awesome, y'all. These are great, great definitions. Equity means ensuring that all provided what they need in the space they are in life to stand up and be supported as all are. Diversity, plain talk, variety, belonging, feeling safe, and that you and your input are valued. Oh my gosh, there are so many great definitions. I can't read them all now. But I can read them here, but I can't read them out loud. So go ahead and read what's in there. Awesome. So great. Diversity at its core. I love that one. Awesome. Oh, I love that, Susie. Yes. Equity ultimately means fairness or justice. Actually, both. Yes. Equity means both fairness and justice. Yes. So great. Okay. I have put definitions for 3 of those terms up on the screen. And I'm just going to share them out loud. You all have given really great definitions, but here's how I define them. Diversity, wanting to acknowledge and possibly celebrate the differences between people, typically focused on compliance, on the superficial ways people are different. Often that's how diversity has been used. It's that superficial. But I would invite that diversity is also celebrating the many ways we're different and seeing those as assets. Yeah, y'all did pretty good. Yes, you're right, Dina. Y'all did pretty awesome. Culturally responsive practice is the ability to learn from and relate respectfully with people of your own culture as well as those from other cultures. Now, here's the really critical thing about that. Culturally responsive practice actually requires that you know your culture. Most people don't know their own culture. Okay, I'm gonna shift that. Most middle-class white people don't know their own culture. Do you want to know why? You don't have to. Because your culture is like the water that you're swimming in. It's at home, it's at school, it's at work, it's what is normal. And so what I find is a lot of middle-class white people don't think they have culture and don't realize what their culture is. And so one of the tools that I'm going to send people is something called the personal culture inventory. What I did is I took the definition of culture and I made 25, like a teacher, I took it apart and made 25 questions out of it. I want to invite you to take that inventory because I think one of the ways that conflict happens in offices is when people don't understand the cultures that are there and they don't know their own culture. And I'll just give you an example. I grew up in a middle-class white home. That was the culture of my parents. So in my home, being on time is really critical. In fact, you're supposed to be 10 minutes early everywhere you go, if not 20 minutes early. My husband grew up in a home where time was whatever it was. He gets there when he gets there, they're on Jones time. But guess what? In my house, being on time is a sign of respect. For my husband, time had nothing to do with respect. Because I had not done an investigation of my culture was everywhere. I thought being on time is the right way to be until I got to be around him and his mom and his brother. And I realized, oh my gosh, they are more present with people than they're worried about time. I'll give you an example. My husband's mother, if your car breaks down, she will sit with you, even though she doesn't know how to fix a car. She'll sit with you until your car is fixed, because presence for her is more important than being on time to her next meeting. My mom, if your car breaks down, she will say to you, I got 10 minutes until I have another meeting. If we can do it in that 10-minute time, we're good. Otherwise, I'm going. Guess what? My mom thought my mother-in-law was disrespectful. So often, if you don't know your culture, you think your culture is the right way to be, and you assign character to culture. My mother-in-law comes from a different cultural place. She has really good character. She's an amazing person. She just has a different culture. And what I learned by living with both of them is, oh my gosh, their cultures are different. They both have great character, but how often do we assign bad character to different culture? But this is what happens when you don't know your own culture. And I use this analogy sometimes, and this may sound weird. It's like a skunk spraying its stank everywhere and not realizing it's stanky because you don't know that you have culture that you're spraying everywhere. I want to invite you all to do the cultural inventory so you get a better sense of what are the why do you get upset at certain things? Why do certain things make you anxious? Probably because your cultural norms told you to be anxious. And what if we were to just say, wow, that's just a different way of being. It's not wrong. So I wasn't planning on talking about that. So that was a freebie there. But culturally responsive practice is adapting and adjusting how we do our work to make sure that everyone is seen and heard and valued. Adapting the way we talk to people, the way we communicate, the way we work together. Last one, equity. I am really intentional about not talking about success. Oftentimes when people talk about equity, they talk about meeting people where they are in order to get them to success. Here's why I don't use success. I talk about thriving or flourishing, because often in the United States, when we think about success, we think about having a nice house, making 6 figures. I think there are some families in this country that's not success for them. Success for them is having their family all live on the same block, or maybe even in the same house, having a job that is fulfilling. And so I like to talk about thriving and flourishing as a way to think about equity. How do we get people from where they are to that? And 2 other things that are really critical, especially in government, thinking about equity. Equity also requires that you look at your systems to figure out where are there barriers for some people and where do you need to build bridges. So it's getting people from where they are to thriving, but there are bridges or walls that we built to bar people from getting to thriving, and there are bridges that we need to build. And so it really requires looking at our systems. Now, in the chat, everybody, what do you think it means to belong? What do you think it means to belong? In the chat, what do you think it means to belong? To be happy where you are, yep. Valued and heard, yep. Awesome. Feel comfortable and safe showing up as your whole self. Accepted, yep. Awesome. Thrive and flourish, where you can be authentic, yep. See yourself reflected, awesome. Heard and to show up as I am, celebrated and seen, perfect. To be at peace, great. So anybody know what is the opposite of belonging? What is the opposite of belonging? And this is kind of a trick question. What is the opposite of belonging? So usually people say othering, exclusion, yep. Shame, yep. Shun, discrimination, hate, yep. Guess what Dr. Brene Brown says is the opposite of this blew my mind. I just heard an interview with her about belonging about 6 weeks ago, and she blew my mind when she said, here's the opposite of belonging. Totally blew my mind. There we go, Kelly. You listen to the same podcast I did. It's fitting in. The opposite of belonging is fitting in. And here's why. And I can say from personal experience, I spent a whole long time in my adult life, especially my young adult life, trying to fit in. I wore my hair straight because that's what all the other executives were doing. I wore a suit and heels to work every day. I did not have long nails. I did not wear big jewelry. I tried to be small because that's what it meant to fit in. And then I hit 40 and I was like, this is how my hair grows naturally. People ask all the time, how do you do it that way? I wake up in the morning, and I know not every Black person has hair like this, but I do this I put some water on it, and I do this and put some oil in it. But I spent 40 years of my life trying to contort myself to be acceptable for other people. That's fitting in. And how often have people contorted themselves in your space to fit in? That's not belonging. So I'm going to just challenge you as you go back to your workspaces. Wow, where have we been sending out some messages that maybe we're not even intentional, that you have to be this way, you have to dress this way, you have to talk this way in order to be acceptable here? So I just want you to think about that. Dina, I'm glad I stood up for myself too. I know this took 6 hours to straighten every day. So I lost that time. I cannot get it back. Cannot get it back. Oh, Susie, yes, I have a child I have one that's ADD and OCD, and then one who's on the autism spectrum. So absolutely, yeah, that neurodiversity makes things really challenging. Yes. And how do we make sure we create spaces where everyone, I say all the time about my son, he is incredibly gifted, but that's not how we talked about autism. I think there's an incredible gift in his autism. He is able to just speak. He says what he thinks. He has no filters, which I've always filtered myself. Like I want to be careful about what I say and not to offend anyone. He would just say things, but I see that now as such an incredible gift. And the older he gets, the more he's stopped masking, and he just has, but we always worked really hard as parents to make sure that he felt celebrated in all the ways that he is. Yeah, superpower. So do we, Susie, we called it a superpower too. So I love that. Yes, mom. Yes, family. I love that so much. So there's some terminology for you. I want to jump into the next piece of things and really get to equity. Okay, let's see. 2:35, 3. Okay, we're getting close. I'm hoping to get through all of this. I'm gonna skip some slides, but you can get the entire slideshow later. So, but I want to walk through this slide really quickly. I see equity as the intersection of my personal story, like how I move through the world, how I have experienced the world with all of my identities, the intersection of my personal story with the story of the community I serve, and then the systems that impact both the community and me. Our understanding of our own self and our identities absolutely affect the decisions that we make for other people. And I'll just give a really quick example. One of the reasons I ran for state superintendent is because when I was the assistant state superintendent, I worked with the legislature almost every week. And I met so many really great legislators who wrote really bad policy for legislation, and not because they were bad people, but because they had not looked at their own stories. And they thought what worked for me should work for every child. But guess what? If all of you are in your 50s and 60s, you're white, you're middle class, that doesn't work for our migrant children. It doesn't work for our immigrant children, doesn't work for our Black children, doesn't work for our urban children. And so what I saw is a bunch of really well-meaning people making really bad decisions because they had not interrogated their own story and they didn't know the stories of others. And so I believe the work that we really have to do, and that's part of the PowerPoint, but I'm not going to get to that. You have to know your own story. What are the identities that you carry into your work that have influenced how you get to move through the world? You've got to do that first. And then you have to figure out what are the stories of others around you. How do they move through the world differently? Because if you don't know their stories, you will make decisions based on what you think is right for you and your family and other people like you. You will not make the best decisions for people who are not like you. So you first need to know your own story. Then you need to know the story of others. Then you need to look at systems and figure out where in systems have we really created barriers for people based on a number of different identity groups. So I've unpacked here self, community, and systems. So you can go back and look at this in the PowerPoint. And then I included slides on self, but I'm not gonna deal with that because that's not what this talk is about. But I wanted to include it for free just so you have it. So how do other people see you? The elements of identity, that's all in the PowerPoint. You can go back and look at it later. So let's get to it now. Let's get to justice. How do we get to justice? So I want you to look at the two images that are on your screen right now. You have one with the sunrise and the fence and the people looking over the fence. And then you have one with the trees and equality and equity. In the chat, what is something that you notice about either one of these? Which slide more resonates for you? I included two different images because I know not everybody sees the same thing in each one. So I like to give people multiple options. What is something that you notice in here? What is something that you learn about equity or that you see related to equity in one of these images? And I want you to think about your own work in state government. What's something in the image that resonates for a way that government tends to respond either with equality or with equity? Oh, I love that. Okay, everyone's getting their needs met, different needs, lifting people up. Justice is removing the wall and making the view accessible to all. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is I will put my my email address in the chat before we finish today. And if you would like the PowerPoint and any other resources, I will make sure that I send them to you. So you just need to email me and I'll put all of that in the chat. Actually, maybe I can do that right now while you're typing. Oops, if I type properly here. Okay, so I just put my email in the chat. Yes, oh my gosh, Nicole, I use that. So Nicole said, I heard an analogy once about shoes. Equality is when we get the size 12.5 shoes, but equity is making sure that each person gets the shoes that fit their feet. Here's the analogy that I use. I use the analogy that I happen to have met Richard Sherman when he was playing for the Seahawks. And Richard Sherman is one of the most giving people that you will ever meet. In fact, he paid for all of the lunch fees for every child in Tacoma public schools, even after he went down to play in San Francisco. Crazy. Like, who does that? But it would be, my husband is a head football coach. It would be like Richard Sherman saying, hey, Erin, I got a whole bag of brand new cleats for your husband's team. And it's Erin Jones 93@gmail.com. Oh, you know what? I wrote it to just Nicole. That's why. It helps if I put it to everybody. That would be useful. So I'm going to do everyone in the meeting. That would help. Thank you for letting me know. So often what we do, and this happens in government, and I think somebody may have just said this, so often we do equality really well in government because equality is really easy. Equality is really easy. So now do you see my information? Does everybody see my information?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Dina, I see you. Your gripe is that agencies are moving towards tech-based filling and correspondence when tech isn't accessible to many marginalized communities. That is such a great example. I use the example in schools of when the pandemic hit. Lots of schools celebrated themselves, patted themselves on the back because they got an iPad for every kid, which is lovely if you have Wi-Fi in your home. Lovely if you have electricity in your home. Is lovely if your parents speak English and can read the directions and know how to turn it on. right? And so I watched a lot of people in school districts celebrating themselves. Look at us. We got all this great technology, but that technology is not helpful if people can't use it. So yes, you're absolutely right. Too often, those are the kinds of things that are happening. Oh, thank you, Sarah. So anyway, when you look at these, one of the things that was said in my physical presentation a couple of hours ago is what's really beautiful is so often it's really just taking away barriers. And so we as state government have to be willing to look at our work and say, where are there barriers to people thriving? And guess what? That can feel really uncomfortable. It can feel really icky to look back in history and say, oh my gosh, we created a barrier there. And instead of getting stuck in that, say, oh, you know what? We created a barrier. Sorry, we're going to take that barrier away. Here's why equity is so hard. Equity is hard because it requires talking to everyone. Equality, you don't have to talk to everyone. You just give people that easy thing and you can blame them if they don't take advantage of it. Instead of saying, okay, why are they not taking advantage of it? Oh, maybe they don't have access with language. Maybe they don't have access with electricity. Equity is really hard. So I just want to invite you all. This work is really hard. Okay, I know I got to finish. I want to give you the last tool today. I have created a tool called the Equity Decision Making Tool, and it is a really simple document, and it is not meant to be used as a document to fill out like an essay and put on a shelf somewhere in a notebook. This tool is meant to be used as a conversation piece. So for example, when you are making any decision for your department, I want you to be able to craft a 1-sentence statement about here's the decision we're trying to make. I think so often in our departments, not everyone has the same understanding about the decision we're about to make. You should have an elevator pitch that you're able to give about this decision you're making. And then I have 7 steps that I want to invite you to talk about as a community before you make this decision. Step number 1 is determine the outcomes. What is the outcome that you want from this decision that you're making? Are you able to clearly articulate, here's where we want to be at the end? Step number 2, data. Do you have data? Both graphs and numbers, but also stories, actual lived experience from people to determine that this is a decision that needs to be made. Step number 3, think about who in the community is going to be most affected, negatively and positively. Who in your community will be most impacted by the decision? Next page. Step 4, who will be positively or negatively impacted by this decision, and get really clear about thinking about who those people are and are you talking to them? Step 5. We got people talking again. Step 5. Strategies to minimize impact. So if I want you to really be thinking about, are we talking to the people that are most minoritized, most marginalized, and have we listened to them to hear maybe they have ideas about ways to eliminate the harm? Step 6, be accountable to the community. So go back to the community. If they say this sucks and it's not working, are you willing to stop and pivot? Okay, stop and pivot. And then last one, step 7, share your results and impact with the community. So if you've engaged them to listen to their feedback, you need to also go back to them later and listen again. Don't let it just be a one-time thing. The last thing in my PowerPoint is something called training for the marathon. This cannot be a 90-minute, you're not going to get to equity in a 90-minute session. So I want to encourage you, as I trained for my half marathon, again, right now I'm running 35 miles a week. I take one day to rest, but I am doing something running related every single day, work day of the week. So 6 days a week, I am doing something related to running. Will you make a commitment to doing something, even just 5 minutes a day, either listening to a podcast, reading a book, watching a movie? I have given you a lot here of books and podcasts. I forgot to include my book, and I'll type it in the chat. My book is called Bridges to Heal Us. You can get it on Amazon. I have not read it yet because it takes like 30 hours to read it and to so that it make it audible. I have not done that yet, but you can get the electronic version on Amazon or the paperback version. It's about $20, I think. Stories and strategies. I also have 3 TED Talks. And if I can ever be a support to you, on the very last slide is all of my contact information. So here's my contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Really, the best way to reach out to me is not email. If you send me an email, I'll send you all the materials. But the best way to reach out to me is actually on social media. I get a million emails. So find me on X, find me on TikTok, find me on Instagram. Thank you all so much for coming today. Sorry for the late start. Thank you for staying with us. Really appreciate you. Thank you too for the tech team for staying with me. And hopefully I will see, if you see me in person, I'm hard to miss. I'm hard to miss. So if you see me in person, please say hello. I will really appreciate that. Have a really great evening. And thank you so much for showing up today. Bye, everyone.